Hello, I'm Jagan from Grow with Data. Welcome to the Crack SQL Interview in 50 question series. In this video series, we'll practice 50 SQL questions across various topics. You can use the playlist Crack SQL Interview in 50 questions to follow the videos related to this series. For each video in the series, you can find the related code on my GitHub. Feel free to explore the code and provide any feedback in the comment section. If you want to see the code, then you know the drill. You have to go to the YouTube channel, Grow with Data, and you have videos and playlists. We are talking about the Crack SQL Interview in 50 questions playlist, and you can see all the videos related to that series. If you want to watch any of the videos, you click on it, and the code will be in the description section. You can go to the description part. There is a code link to GitHub, and you can see all the code and the select statement we discussed in that video. And we have all the code in the left side. Okay, so that's the coding part. Now we have to continue with the 24th video of the series, and we continue with the sorting and the grouping method. Let's see the data, and you can go over the question in detail. So we are given the table activity. Let's create the table. Okay. Now, with that activity table, the task is to find the daily active user count for a period of 31 days ending Jan 31st, 2024. Okay, so in this table, we have the user ID and the session for that user, the activity date, and the activity type. The activity type, we have 4 different activities like open session, end session, scroll down, and send messages. If the user do any of these activities on a particular day, that means the user is an active user. And every session is connected to a single user. If you see here, the session 1 connects to user ID 1. Session 4 connects to user ID 2. Same way for session 2 and 3. So every session connected to a single user. And this data is basically like a social media data. Every day you just log in and do some activities and you close. Okay, now the 2 key points we have to note here is that it's a 31-day activity and it ends with Jan 31st, 2024. For example, if you have the date from Jan 1st to Jan 31st, right? It's a 31 days. But when you do a coding part of it, let's comment this out. Comment the code and go here. So if you say select the date 2024 01/31 is the start end date, and the start date is date add, and we give the date 24/01/31 interval minus 31 day start date. What's happening? End date. Okay, so when you run this, if you see this, it end date is Jan 31st, which is hard coded, but the start date is not Jan 1st because the date field that includes Jan 31st. So if you say includes Jan 31st and you subtract 31, so 31 minus 31 is 0. So there is no date as 0. So if you say 31, Jan 31 minus 30, that means it includes 31 and then it takes minus 31. That means it takes the 31 days plus Jan 31. That means it says 32 days now. So that's why when you say 101 and it crosses and adds one more day. So if you want to cover only from Jan 1st to Jan 31st, including Jan 31st, that means you have to say only 30. If we say 30, then what happens? The date range covers including 131, you have to have 30 more days. Okay, so with 30 more days, then it will say from 31st to 1st. So it's a key thing when you are playing around with the date field. So when you have the interval, you make sure if it says inclusive of a date, then if they give the date interval, you make sure you have one date reduced from that interval to include that So if you have minus 30, then it covers Jan 1st till Jan 31st. That's the key part for this question. Okay, now how to create the SQL part. It's a very basic SQL. You say select from activity table. They asked for the date, which is this session activity date, and the total users. If we say count of user ID as active user, ACTIV, active users. Since we use aggregate function, you say group by 1. So we run here. For Jan 20th, we have 4 active users. If you go to the data and see, for Jan 20th, we have 4 records, but user-wise, it's only 2 users. User 1 have 3 activities and user 2 have 1 activity. So the output is not showing the active users, the distinct users. It's showing all the user activities. So to get only the user, the distinct of users, we use the keyword distinct, DSTINCT, distinct user ID. So if we say distinct of user ID, then it will get the user ID and take distinct out of it. So Jan 20th, you have 2 user, 21st, you have 2 user. And we still includes December 31st because we haven't put the filter yet. To put the filter, we use a where the activity date should be between the start date, which is supposed to be 30, still they say 31 days inclusive of Jan 31st. So we use 31st as the end date and then 30 days interval for the start date. Now if you run, we filter out the December 31st date, right? And one more key thing to look for is when you say between, the date is inclusive of start date and end date, okay? But when you do it, it should be start date and end date. If you change the position of between end date and start date, then the query is not going to return any value because the date function always looks for the start date as the first parameter and end date as the second parameter. So you make sure you have that as the order, start and the end date. Okay, fine. Now, if there is an additional restriction saying that the user activity is considered only if the user do any action, like opening the session or ending the session is not considered an action, right? If they give you an additional filter, then what you do, along with the date condition, you can simply add the condition and user activity as a column name, activity type. You can exclude the activities which are not considered as activity, like open session and end session, or you can include the activities which are all considered as an activity, right? So however you want to do it, in the scroll down and send message. If these are the 2 activities which are considered as an active user, then you do a filter and then you run it. Okay, so you can see on 120 we have only 1 user. Previously it was 2 because in 120 the user 2 did only open session. He haven't done any scroll or any send messages. So we filter out 2. So if you have more conditions, then you have to work on it. As I said, if you want to say exclude the condition, the same way, instead of the activity in, you can simply say and the activity not in open session and end session. Other than the open session and end session, if there is any other activity, then you can consider that as a active user. Okay, it's 1 and 2. You say not in, not activity in will give you the same result. So not will take all the result. If it's true, it convert that to false. If it false, it convert that to true. So you can put the not at the beginning of it, or you can put not in, however you want to. So the takeaway from this sequence is you have to know how to understand the activity date interval if it says inclusive. The second one is if there is a date filter between, you make sure it's a start date and end date. Start date should be the smaller date, end date should be the greater date. If that is the flow, then you get the result. If you change it, then the expected result won't be there. And if you have an additional conditions, you can just add to it. If you say not, you can say activity not in or not activity in. Both the ways it works. Right? It's a simple question. Only thing is you have to understand how you manipulate the date field and how you add the additional filters. Hope you like this video. Thanks for watching.